Toji Fushiguro is a character known for many things. He's a powerful and proficient curse tool user. He's a ruthless mercenary who will fight anyone to make a quick buck. He's definitely a less than present father, but what he is most importantly known as is the character with no cursed energy. The first character with a perfected heavenly restriction. A character known as the Sorcerer Killer. In this video, me and my friend No Operator will be following up a video on his channel in which we pit him against the likes of every cursed spirit in Jujutsu Kaisen. Here, we'll be taking a look at the Sorcerer side of this gauntlet and trying to determine how deserving of the name Sorcerer Killer Toji truly is. And to start this intense gauntlet off, we'll be pitting Toji up against Miwa.
Ronin, what are your thoughts? Because this is kind of your domain, is it not? Mr. Miwa kills Kenjaku.
Yeah, so here's the thing, right? Here's the thing. Miwa might be able to pull off a win against Toji and Maki.
Shut the fuck up.
No, for real though. Toji and Maki actually beat Miwa as of chapter 204. All right, later on, maybe might be more debatable, but as of right now, I mean, Miwa lost to Maki in their first encounter before all of Maki's power-ups, before all of her extra abilities, right? She's not pulling off a win against Maki after like two rounds of steroids, right? And she's not doing the same to Toji. I don't know if there's any disagreement there from you.
Your glorious leader tells the truth. Look at that. Miwa stands. Read it and weep.
Yup. Don't worry, Calling Games Miwa gonna be different though. Next up, Momo, the curse tool manipulator. And from what I've heard, right, you seem to have a little bit of an issue with Momo.
Oh, well, you know what? Momo could definitely beat Inumaki, but she couldn't beat Toji.
Yeah.
Or Maki for any stance. That wind not doing anything to stop him.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the best thing you could argue is like, okay, maybe if you just take the name of her ability, she can like remove their weapons, but who cares? Toji and Maki are gonna run up and punch her in the face a lot. That's about it. That's how that fight goes down. And I guess following the trend of characters that start with the letter M, we have Mai, and this is another fight that we've actually kind of seen already.
I think her literal only chance is if she actually catches Toji or Maki with an actual bullet. and even then, I feel like that doesn't really stop her much.
Yeah, I mean, she pulls out the 6-shooter, right? She brings out that 7th bullet or whatever. Toji's catching it, Maki's catching it, or it's just not hurting them. I mean, she gets bolded pretty badly. It's just a recreation of what happened in Goodwill, but worse. Next up on the list, we have of Utahime, we have Haibara, and then we have Yaga. These are all characters that are either weak or don't show much. And I don't know how you feel about them. Are there any feelings to be had about these characters, actually, now that I think about it?
Toji/Maki takes all 3 of them at once.
Oh, you're spitting. That's actually, they all show up. What is Yaga? Yaga's gonna sick his little bear on them, I guess. I don't know. That's not a real...
I mean, to be honest with you, Yaga, I mean, like, if we see the unregistered special grade version of Yaga with the army of cursed corpses, sure, but even then, it's like,
what are
it's
those
just
scale
like the
to?
300 scene.
Yeah.
It's like Toji or Maki by themselves could probably handle that. So I don't think any Jujutsu High faculty is doing anything, frankly.
Yeah, we've already seen like Maki tear through an entire clan single-handedly. It's not like it's that weird for her to be able to like rampage through an abundance of relatively strong characters on her own. So bring in the cursed corpses or not, Yaga is not doing all that much. Haibara lost to like a grade 1 curse in the Gojo flashback. And Utahime, I mean, Gojo called her weak like 12 years ago. I doubt all that much has changed in that amount of time. Next up on the list, we're gonna keep going with the staff. We got Gakuganji. Now, how do you think his electric guitar skills are going to match up to the Heavenly Restriction duo?
Do you think Gakuganji was actually having an issue with
Coat
Mr.
Rack guy?
What's his name?
Yeah, Coat Rack Man. Yeah.
Like, do you think he was just trying to, like, make time go by? Or do you think, like, because you think the principal of a school would probably be able to do a little bit more in that time frame. He could have folded. I would expect him to fold that, man.
Yeah, I don't know. So I've always looked at that pretty weird as well. I honestly think, and this is unfortunate, well, you know, depending on how you feel about Gakuganji, I think he probably could not have beaten that man any quicker. I think that was a pitched battle. I think he was struggling.
No.
He was struggling, bro. I don't know. If Gojo doesn't show up, right? If Gojo does not pop up to help him, that could have gone either way.
He can't shine that bat symbol today. That guitar is turning into the world's saddest violin.
Yeah, Gakuganji's getting clapped, and for all the people that actually like Yaga, that might Maki and Toji might be getting revenge for you guys. Up next, we have Panda, Noritoshi Kamo, and Ino. Let's throw him in the mix. All right. These are all characters that are actually, when you look at them, right, comparatively to a lot of the other ones we've talked about so far, they're actually pretty strong, I guess. Panda's recommended to be a grade 1, Kamo's a semi-grade 1, and then Ino's also a semi-grade 1 at this point in the story. So, we're actually starting to look at some kind of competent characters show up in this versus battle. And do you think any of them can do anything of any kind against these two characters?
I mean, first of all, Ino's face might need to go through rearrangement surgery after the kind of beatdown that Toji gave him. So yeah. I think that already is one off the list. And for Panda and Noritoshi, I mean, like, blood manipulation is interesting, and gorilla mode with its the drumming beat would probably be, fun for them to first deal with if they actually landed a hit. But I don't see any of these characters stopping the absolute tanks that are the two heavenly restriction users.
All right, let me ask this, right? Let me cape for Panda a little bit. Panda brings out his older sister, his big sister, right? The good old, what is it, a triceratops, a rhinoceros? It's something big, right? Pulls out the big sister. Are Toji and Maki struggling?
I sincerely see either Maki or Toji being able to split Panda into 3 with their bare hands.
Can you imagine them using like their soul splitter abilities, and they're just like, no, you're not siblings anymore. You guys are in different entities. That's actually an interesting idea. You're just like, wait, yeah,
sever their connection. Yeah, that would be hard.
Yeah, they see the cores. They see the cores with like their soul eyes, and they're like, yeah, all right, cool, getting rid of you really quickly. Yeah,
I feel like that's even a good point. Panda couldn't even do that fake out because like they'd literally be able to see.
Yeah. So with them absolutely dominating Panda and all of his siblings, Maki and Toji will be made an enemy by Pita. So that's gonna be a pretty interesting arc for them. Now, this is another one that is kind of a step back. We're looking at Remy, right? The scorpion-tailed. Yeah.
Don't do this.
You think she's gonna convince him to not kill her? Like,
it's too early for the carnage.
Yeah, Remy's getting folded. She's gonna ask Toji to help her, and Toji's gonna be like, "You got any money? A place to stay? No? All right." Goodbye. Now, next up, we're gonna blast through all of these, right? Maybe even look at them, all of them. Jinichi, Ranta, Haba, which is helicopter guy, Dido, and then the sumo wrestler. Any of them competitors? Any of them throwing their hat in the ring, getting a little.
Well, you know what, Dido and the sumo guy. Now that you mentioned them, I mean, like, I see them like being the first people that can kind of even put up a decent fight. Like, even Maki was like willing to like learn and like gained enough mutual respect of the sumo guy despite his other qualities. So like, I mean, they must be worth something. Now, do I think Maki is probably like an amalgamation of both of them and would be able to like take them both on at the same time? Sure.
Yeah.
But like, I think it's kind of a disrespect to put them in the same kind of category as the other people that you mentioned.
Helicopter guy and Jinichi and Ranta.
Oh,
yeah,
my
for sure.
God.
Helicopter man is gonna be like, my head is invincible. Like it can't be broken. And then he's just gonna be gone. He's gonna be like Jogo when he looks at Sukuna in the afterlife. He's like, why am I crying? Oh, I'm already dead.
Yeah, it literally disintegrates against Maki's fist or Toji's fist instead of Yuji, like where he was still like basically skull fractured.
Yeah, but
turns to dust.
I do agree with you though that Dido and like Mio, sumo and swordsman guy alike actually do have some pretty decent scaling. Like, it gets forgotten a little bit, but Dido was putting up a pretty good fight against Curse Spirit Naoya, right? And that same Naoya, that same Naoya was giving Maki some trouble. Maki was getting cooked. before her like second awakening. So for Dido to be able to handle that now, it is pretty impressive for sure. I don't think they would stack up to where like Maki is now, and by proxy where Toji was in his prime, but I do think it would probably be somewhat interesting. I could see, one of the things I'd be interested in is how is Toji interacting with either of these guys? Toji seems to be, if it's a dude, he no nonsense. He don't care about your personality quirks. It's like whatever. But yeah, I think that'd be a little interesting scuffle. Maybe they'd agree to enter the sumo domain, beat him up for a little bit, and then walk out. Now,
don't, unfortunately, because like even if they had full setup and they had full preparation, they had a bunch of things marked already that would be able to be thrown or be able to be set up. I think both Toji and Maki are smart enough to figure that out.
Interesting.
I honestly do. Like Toji reminds me so much of just the level of battle intelligence, like specifically when he fights against Geto and he gets pulled into Kuchisani Ona's innate domain. He takes one look and he goes, okay, so this is a domain that does this, this, and this, and I could probably take this on. All right, let's do this. In like what, 2 seconds?
Yeah,
like
that's
just
true.
Like on the fly, he's able to figure that out. So like it would probably, I don't think he'd be able to figure out their technique just as quick, but
it would be something that he would be able to find out somehow.
Yeah, and also, you know what? It does call into question because I guess you'd have to have that prior knowledge of stars. Do you think that like in his life, like Toji would have like, I don't know, like was he around for Sumiki? Like would he have been like cool enough to be like, okay, let me hear you talking about stars real quick.
Yeah, so they definitely interacted. Like we've seen some minor things from Gege. He does little sketches in some of the like volume releases where it shows like, yeah, Toji was somewhat involved with her and like very young Megumi. So that could have possibly come up. I will say though, one thing Toji has that is just a kind of a get out of jail free button anyway is the inverted spear of heaven. He might just be able to just be like, okay, I'm gonna just walk towards you with this like curse technique depleting like knife, and it doesn't matter because it's not like the ability hasn't shown the ability to like negate space manipulation, right? It does that versus Gojo in the flashback arc. Before it even comes into contact with him, it's able to sort of delete the space between them, or at least negate Gojo's ability to manipulate infinity like that. So Toji specifically has one, he's very intelligent, so he might be able to put 2 and 2 together. But 2, he just has an ability that sort of gets rid of curse techniques. And this is another thing I actually thought of while I was just thinking about this matchup. Do you think Kurara's ability even works on characters without cursed energy?
Well, she may not be able to mark Toji or Maki specifically, but her technique still has versatility or utility, I guess I should say, and like and just like sending debris, or like at the very least like being able to make it hard for Toji or Maki to actually get to her and actually do damage.
Got you.
Using the star constellation, she probably can still create obstacles or a certain path that they have to follow. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I understand. So like even if they can't themselves be marked, circumstances could be set up where they still have trouble getting to her. Yeah, that makes complete sense.
I still think her technique is still viable against them. It's just how long would it be viable for? And also one thing I want to mention, like I still think that even without inverted spear of heaven, because we got a lot of comments on our last one saying that like, well, the inverted spear of heaven's broken now, so you know Toji technically wouldn't have that in any future battles, which I think it's a major piece of his arsenal regardless, as just his character in general, so that's why we would use that in scaling.
Yeah.
And not even that, like I think without the inverted spear of heaven, even if he, let's say he doesn't know the star guide or whatever, Toji is still just has the perseverance and just that dog in him. I'm sorry for lack of any other term. Like he'd just figure it the fuck out.
Yeah.
He just would.
Yeah, I mean, Toji is just a very intelligent character, and Maki just seems like, even if you think she lacks some of that strategic intelligence, there's only so long even somebody super hacks can deal with somebody so much faster and stronger than them. You know what I mean? Like, if Megumi is pinning you down with his physical strength after your technique is figured out, it's not like Toji and Maki are are in anywhere near the same like dimension of strength and speed that Kurara is. They should be able to like vastly overwhelm her, and they might be able to just do that with pure speed of like getting through the scenarios faster than Kurara can set them up. You know what I mean?
These are also two characters that aren't afraid to think outside of the box at a moment's notice. I mean, not even Toji against Kuchisani Onna is one example, but for Maki even, when she fights Miwa of all people, Miwa uses simple domain, and like upon a moment's analytic, Maki's like, you know what? I'm not gonna come in close, breaks her fucking weapon, and just tosses that shit at her, and then to close the distance and immediately takes care of that issue.
Yeah.
And she wasn't even fully aware of what it was.
Yeah, for sure. So she's just like, oh, interesting ability. Got it. Gonna deal with it. For sure, 100%. So yeah,
and
I
that's
think
what I mean when I think, I'm sorry to cut you off, but that's what I mean like when I say they would literally do whatever it takes to get that W.
Yeah, 100%. Definitely one of the more interesting versus like matchups that we've covered so far, just because of like the hacks versus like overwhelming ability. But I mean, Kurara would still fall all the same. Now, next up, we're going to get into the group that are a little bit stronger, or just characters that I think are more interesting to discuss going up against Toji and Maki. And the first one on here would be Nobara. And Nobara's here just because I think she's a little bit stronger than the average character we've talked about before. She's pulled off a Black Flash. She's fought alongside Yuji in their fight versus Eso and Kechizu. She's showed off some pretty like decent feats when she's like on her guard and things like that. She's even able to do some damage to Mahito with her straw doll technique. So what do you think, if anything, Nobara would be doing against either of these two characters? Do you think her long range would kind of offset the massive physical difference?
I think that's really all she has at her disposal against these two characters. Like a physical fight just isn't working. Without, she has no chance whatsoever in an actual physical fight. It's actually surprising she was able to do what she did against Mahito, and just use her environment to her advantage. But even then, even in the best circumstances, she has no choice but to use her long range ability. Specifically, I think the one chance she has at actually doing damage would be to doing something she can to create some kind of connection, and then hurting herself the way she did against Kechizu and Eso.
Yeah.
And using that against Toji or Maki. I think that's really the only chance she has at more or less even doing damage to them.
For sure, yeah. And I think if you could argue that that connection gets brought up maybe because they don't take her serious, well, Toji, probably not in character, is like, he's just like, no, hammer, dangerous. And then just goes crazy, right? But in the event that like Nobara is somehow to make a connection, I think that would probably be her only way out, right? I don't think Nobara really stands much of a chance, but she does seem to be pretty ingenious in moments like this. Like against Mahito, she takes into account the fact that she knows his technique, or at least knows that his technique is dangerous if his palms touch her. So I think I can imagine her being aware that these characters, something's different about them, like their complete lack of curse energy, and trying to attack from far range. Regardless of that though, I think we agreed Toji and Maki are going to make relatively light work of her. Now this next one that I find pretty interesting, simply because it's another one of those how do the hacks interact with Heavenly Restriction, is Inumaki. And I know you have an interesting history with him, so I'll let you jump into Inumaki and like how you think these abilities work against someone like Toji and Maki.
So Inumaki is kind of interesting when it comes to Toji, because I even dealt with this talking about Yuta versus Toji. And how Yuta could use curse speech as a viable option against Toji. I mean, how do you feel? Like, how do you think Toji or Maki stand up against curse speech? Like, do you think they have absolutely no defense whatsoever because they lack cursed energy and like they just get bodied by it? Or would you say that because of Heavenly Restriction's special features, their durability goes over to curse speech as well?
Yeah, so
they can't block against it for with cursed energy. So
so there's, in my opinion, there's only two ways really, like two main ways that you can interpret how they interact, right? You either believe that they like curse speech kind of like negs them, right? Like they immediately lose to curse speech 10 times out of 10, simply because they have no curse energy resistance. And that's sort of possible, right? I think there are ways around it. Like I think Toji, for example, even Maki. Earplugs, or I mean, they can recognize. I mean, Maki should be aware of the clan symbol, and so should Toji on Inumaki's face. If he's like, oh, this is a cursed speech user, I can't deal with them. Instant blitz, and you're beating up Inumaki, right? You don't even have to leave him time to get off cursed speech. But I personally think that their natural resistance to curses, which Yuki mentions, when she's talking about like why Toji was superhuman would probably come into play here. I think that they have an innate resistance to like cursed energy based attacks, not just because of their durability, but because like heavenly restriction amps their like I would say it's for the same reason they can see, sense, and like, you know, interact with cursed spirits in a way that a normal sorcerer would be able to. So even if you go with like the less charitable interpretation for them, I think they're still dealing with Inumaki relatively easily. The only thing that would change if you say, oh, his cursed speech can't affect them, is that they have to deal with him extremely quickly.
Nope, completely agree. That was even my previous argument that you said, and you hit the nail right on the head, where I feel like Toji especially, I mean, even Maki too, with just the amount of knowledge they have, they would be able to know they're dealing with a cursed speech user, and they would take precautions to go against that. Whether that be wearing earplugs, as I just joked about before, or even like in the heat of the moment, like pulling a mask to masculine and like literally blowing their eardrums for what they need to do to take them out. And then, I mean, I don't know, we've seen Maki regenerate intestines. Do you think they would really be able to regenerate their eardrums? I guess that's a whole nother discussion, but.
For sure, yeah. And even if not, like, it's not like they're at a loss of senses, right? Their abilities, they're like the senses that they do have, even if you say, oh, they can't hear after, Toji probably is willing to do anything. So is Maki to get that win if necessary, because it's either that or lose the fight. So if it comes down to that,
get stronger with the elimination of the others. So not that they need a power up in any of those fields, but
yeah, for sure. So worst comes to worst, right? They'll do what they need to do, and they'll be able to deal with Inumaki pretty soundly. Next up on the list, we'll be talking about Reggie and Hazanoki. And I just decided to pair these two characters together because when they debut, they are shown working together, and I would just consider Hazanoki almost like standard equipment for Reggie in any given battle. We're pairing them together to make it a little bit easier on our part, but also so that Toji and Maki have a little bit more trouble in their match, seeing as how neither of them are that powerful individually. Do you think that it becomes significantly more difficult for them if they're together? Like, do you think the combination of Hazanoki and Reggie makes it an interesting fight, or it makes it like Toji or Maki are ever on the back foot in this conflict?
The reason why I would want to do that is because I think alone they really stand no chance, even with Reggie summoning Mack trucks and shit. Like, Toji and Maki would just be able to slice through that and take them out. And like, Hazanoki's reverse curse technique presents a problem, but like I said, both of them could decapitate both of them. I think even together, they stand a better chance, but even together, I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm thinking one not win con, but one way they can deal out some sort of level of damage is Hazanoki, because of his reverse curse technique, is used as like an attention getter, as somewhat of bait versus either one of them. And then Reggie pulls out his trump card, his like 32-ton, 2-story apartment complex or whatever, and just drops it on their head. I'm imagining that Toji and Maki would immediately sense that, and they're like, all right, cool, I'll dodge it. But how cold would it be if they're just like, okay, and it just lands on their shoulders, like, all right, cool.
Yeah, they're just like holding literally the giant house on their backs, like this is nothing.
They might just block it, and Nanami might just be countered with a punch to the face, a slice, whatever you think they would counter with, and that would be the end of that.
Wait, you know it would be super like hardcore, like Nanami like trying to see a 7-3, and he's like, I can't see it. I can't see it on them.
It doesn't exist. There is no weakness.
Bodied.
That would be hard. Yeah, wow. That's a crazy, like, there is no weakness. Wow, that's actually a really cool idea. Just imagining Nanami try to find that one is like, no, they don't have one. There exists no weakness on these.
Done. Just taken out immediately after that.
Yeah.
We're going with that.
That's the headcanon. That's how it happens. Yeah, that's facts now. Write it in the manga, guys. Add that in your notes.
Hit us up.
For real, but we got great ideas. That's all I'm saying. Now, next up here, we have Meimei. This is an interesting one because Meimei kind of like prides herself on her physical abilities. She says that she's reached the like utmost limit of like cursed energy reinforcement and like physical strength. And then she also has an interestingly controversial ability being Bird Strike, or at least the potency of it seems to be in question for a lot of people, because she has the statement of nobody's ever survived Bird Strike except like Gojo Satoru, right?
So vague, right?
Right? Yeah. It's like, what does that mean? Who have you used it against?
It begs the question. Yeah, it leaves so much for interpretation.
Where would you say Meimei does? Let's say relative to Nanami. Do you think she does any better than our 7-3 sorcerer?
Ignore. I think she would be able to fight. I think Meimei would fight them. She would put up a decent back and forth and go, you know what? Fuck this. I'm gonna die. I'm out of here. But I don't think she has anything to beat them. And do I think Bird Strike would actually be able to do damage? I think it would do damage to them. I don't think it would do anything like a purple would.
Yeah.
You know, the kind of damage we saw that was left to Toji, but I definitely could see Bird Strike being something they wouldn't want to get hit with.
For sure. Bird Strike is such an interesting, like the way it's phrased is so interesting because Meimei really does say, yeah, it's no one's ever survived it except Gojo, which means it's funny for two reasons. One, it means he's attempted to use it on Gojo before and saw that it didn't work, which is wild. But two, you don't make that comparison, right, unless I think, unless you've used it against pretty significantly strong people, you know what I mean? You don't just say only Gojo survives it unless you're very confident that a lot of people you've tested it against had no chance. So I'm definitely kind of the opinion that Bird Strike is vaguely powerful, but we don't really have a good reason to say it's ripping through Maki or Toji's durability at all. It's something that I think would be useful. It'd be interesting to see it used against somebody that has the durability to withstand it, just to see what the upper limit of its attack potency is, but it's definitely not going absolutely crazy on them either way. And I'm kind of in agreement with you. I think Meimei physically is probably going to put up a semi-decent fight. Like up to this point, it's probably going to be some of the best hand-to-hand or like sword-to-sword or weapon-to-weapon combat we've seen thus far, but nothing that like really makes us question whether or not Toji or Maki can win.
Yeah, I still think Toji and Maki take the wash, no problem. But I think it's not like, you know, she throws her axe and like it just snaps in half. You know, yeah. I think she'd be able to like at least clash them a bit before. Like I said, I think Meimei is just gonna dip out.
Yeah.
Before she loses.
Yeah.
But I digress.
For sure. The next one up is also another interesting one, and this is Kusakabe. Now, Kusakabe is an interesting character because I mean he's a grade 1 without a technique. Yes. Listen, Meimei agenda aside, Kusakabe is pretty interesting just because of a couple of statements that exist for him. So the one main one is Meimei seeing Yuji fight in Shibuya, right, when they're teamed up, and basically saying that since Kusakabe, Yuji is the first one to get this strong without a curse technique. And I don't know how you feel about that statement, but the way I look at that is she's basically saying, yeah, you know, you're about Kusakabe level. And I'm like, Gege gave a reason for him being on the volume cover. Like, it's being as like competent as Yuji, which even at this point is not anything to sneeze at in my opinion, right? Because Yuji here he's waxing like semi-grade 1 curse spirits very easily. I mean, he's fought special grade single-handedly. He's a very, very powerful character, especially physically at this point. And then you have the infamous blocking maximum technique Uzumaki, right? I don't know. Kusakabe might be him. What are your thoughts?
He's definitely not him. But on the real, I don't know how much that statement holds weight. So like for me, this is gonna sound really biased. Like you're like building this man up, and I'm gonna come in here and like just poop on everything. But it's like Kusakabe, like so like yeah, Yuji. I haven't seen anyone become as powerful since Kusakabe. I mean, what other sorcerers do we know that don't have cursed energy? I mean, I guess besides Toji. So it's not like there's a huge scale to go off of. I don't think Kusakabe has much to do against Toji and Maki.
Interesting.
I think he may be able to put up as decent of a back and forth as Meimei can. That's me being generous because he did block that maximum Uzumaki, and I can't knock him for that. That is a pretty huge feat. Like. Miwa would have been erased into the sands of time had he not stepped in there. So I have to give him that. And that definitely wasn't any, I don't know. I don't see Toji or Maki having any problems with this man.
Yeah, I'm just curious where you thought Kusakabe's good, because I think he's like he sits in a weird place of, he's definitely not the type of character to go out and look for a fight. I mean, hell, Kusakabe might see them, sense something's off about them, and just be like, no, it's okay.
Grade 1 is such a big, like, it's such a huge there's such a huge gap between the weakest grade 1 sorcerer and the strongest grade 1 sorcerer, just because of grade 1, you're supposed to be able to take out special grade curses, but special grade is like such
also a big margin of error there.
Exactly. It's really tough to kind of grace that, because yeah, he may be the strongest grade 1 sorcerer without any cursed energy, but what does that really mean?
For sure.
In the grand scheme of it, when you're in the same kind of category as, like, I mean, yeah, Kento Nanami or like Meimei, but like you're also in the same category as someone like Naobito.
Yeah, 100%.
Who, like, would run circles around him.
Yeah, 100%. It's completely fair. Yeah, so Toji is beating up Kusakabe, so is Maki.
Toji and Maki without the heavenly restriction.
Oh, that's wild. That's insane. I can't condone this slander, but I will agree with the first part of my statement. There we go.
That slander?
Yeah,
that's
slander.
Generosity. That's me complimenting, but
that's
okay.
Crazy. Oh, that's crazy. All right, so up next on the list, we got Mechamaru. And Mechamaru has two separate forms that I think we can kind of address, because I think the scaling for them is going to be vastly different. Obviously, we have his base Mechamaru form that he uses against Panda in the Goodwill arc, but we also have his like ultimate Mechamaru giant mech form that he uses against Mahito after it's revealed of his betrayal and things like that. So what do you think about both iterations? How do you think Toji and Maki like interact or deal with someone like him with his abilities and stuff like that?
Well, to be honest with you, I mean, as far as goes the Goodwill event, Mechamaru definitely doesn't really stand much of a chance. That's pretty obvious. You know, they'll be able to take care of that one robot anytime, especially even if he uses that giant, what is it, a mode albatross?
Yeah.
The like, giant energy beam. Mm-hmm. Like, I think they could literally tank that.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, just no problem. So I think the real conversation lies in Ultimate Mechamaru, because I even feel like Ultimate Mechamaru has two different phases where we even see what I think is interesting in the beginning when he starts fighting Mahito, when he summons like multiple different puppets all at the same time.
Yeah.
I feel like that's something that doesn't really get explored a lot, which is an interesting way that he could fight someone.
For sure.
I feel like it's something similar to what they deem Yaga an unregistered special grade for, with the army of cursed corpses, or the army of basically robots that can follow whatever he wants to do.
It is impressive in that, like, it's interesting that, you know, seeing these two match up, because their heavenly restrictions are diametrically opposed almost. Like Toji and Maki are the physical pinnacles you can achieve, but with the caveat of having zero cursed energy, and Mechamaru is the complete opposite. Do you think that the sheer number of semi-grade ones maybe presents a problem for them? Because he does reveal in Goodwill that, unlike Panda's assessment would state, he is a semi-grade 1, and it you know, maybe there's like 10, 20, 30. Do you think the numbers, you know, in spite of their relative weakness individually, that first phase may be a problem for him?
I definitely feel like that first phase could create a problem, especially considering it all depends on the amount of robots, right? Mm-hmm. It all depends on the amount of mechs that Mechamaru is able to summon up. Like if it starts getting to 20, 30, maybe even more, who knows? I mean, then I could see Toji or Maki having a problem with that. Mm-hmm. Definitely. I think anyone, no matter how strong they are, would. I mean, I feel like Toji or Maki just have that dog in them. They'll surpass their limits.
Yeah.
They'll go through it and they'll take care of that. And I feel like even comes down to when we get to Ultimate Mechamaru, the giant mech. I feel like even with 5-year charges and however many charges that the giant mech has, even though it does reach temporary special grade level, if Mahito can do it, then, well, I don't see why Toji and Maki can't.
Yeah, and we're kind of on the same page there. I think like Mahito's relative ease of dispatching all of the mechs either implies that those extra mechs are just weaker than Mechamaru's main form was, or just that the sheer numbers doesn't really matter with like an overwhelming power advantage. So I could see them dealing with it. Obviously, Toji and Maki are the clan destroyers, so it's not that weird for them to be able to handle even grade 1 level characters all at once. As for the ultimate Mechamaru mode, I think this would probably be one of the harder matchups that we've covered so far, in part because he's achieving temporary special grade status like you said, but also because I think it's kind of a bad matchup for the types of characters that they are. You know what I mean? The very hand-to-hand combatant, not crazy, you know, innate hacks, like they don't have any techniques or anything like that. And obviously Mechamaru inside the mech is going to be what they have to end up beating. So
so you disagree. You don't think it would be so easy?
No, I don't think it would be easy. I think at the end of the day, they would probably be able to come out on top just via wearing him down, because he would have to use he would continuously have to use year charges to burn away at their durability. But I think it would be tough for them as close quarters, human-esque physical fighters, you know what I mean? Where most of their combatants are around their size, or they're not 20 times their size, you know what I mean? They don't have the ability to maneuver, I think, as well as Mahito. Mahito literally can fly, he can manipulate himself in the water. He has a level of maneuverability against Mechamaru that I don't necessarily think they would have. They would have to start like chopping down him like from the feet up, and I think that would make it somewhat difficult.
Well, the acrobatics that we've seen Maki do when in her fight with Naoya, the kind of speed that we've seen, whether she can fly or not, I still think she'd be able to dodge most of the things that Ultimate Mechamaru can throw at her. And with the Soul Liberation Blade, I don't know, man.
Yeah, for sure.
Maybe we see two different perspectives on this one, but I could see a situation where they're just insanely, able to take this.
And I would agree, like, at the outcome, I think at the end of the day, Toji and Maki are able to secure that victory. I don't think Mechamaru, even in his ultimate form, is able to get the job done. I just think it's one of those matchup things where, because of how they fight and the opponents that they're typically matched up against, they may face a little bit more of that matchup trouble. At the end of the day, they're still winning. The difference may just be in how difficult we think it is for the respective characters.
Yeah, I'm sure the comments will break that tie.
Yeah, for sure. Now, next up on the list, we have another character that's, pretty powerful, albeit like somewhat ambiguous in terms of their power, and that's Uraume. Where do you have them? What do you think they can do? How do you think they interact with Toji and Maki?
Well, from what it seems like, Uraume's ice curse technique is just insane. I mean, they were able to completely just like freeze almost like how many sorcerers were there at Shibuya?
Like
about like 10 of them.
Yeah,
like all at once. And Yuji was even under the impression that like they were just fucked.
Yeah.
Like, this is it. And the only reason that Uraume didn't really take them all out was because she knew she needed to at least keep Yuji alive.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, like, in terms of even physical abilities, Uraume isn't anything to sneeze at. When piercing blood is shot directly at them, not only does Uraume react, but they actually catch it with their hand initially, and it doesn't go through in the same way that it does against Yuji in the Choso versus Yuji fight. Granted, right, Choso is admittedly fatigued. Kenjaku says so himself, saying that Choso must be tired, and Choso doesn't really argue against that at all. So, you may be able to say that Choso isn't at his peak, piercing blood isn't reaching those mock levels of speed because he may be tired or mentally off due to the realization of Kenjaku and Yuji being his brother. But I would still say being able to scrap with Choso, being able to catch a piercing blood barehanded, and then on top of that, having reverse curse technique to heal the minimal amount of damage you took is impressive. And like you said, the ice curse technique was freezing Yuji, was freezing Choso, it was freezing all of the other sorcerers there. And Yuji saw the ice block coming down at him. He thought he was finished, right? He thought it was over for him. So Uraume is definitely a strong character, one that might be somewhat of a problem.
Yeah, because if Yuji has similar durability, maybe not as durable and maybe not as strong as, Toji or Maki, but Yuji, I feel like, is somewhat of a similar feat.
Yeah.
In whatever kind of situation that he is in his body. So I feel like if he wasn't able to break out of it, it definitely shows how strong the ice could potentially be against them.
For sure. And who's to say like Uraume doesn't have, higher levels or colder ice, you know what I mean? Clearly Uraume was trying to somewhat preserve Sukuda's vessel. One can only speculate how much higher Uraume could go. I will say, in spite of that, I don't think that Toji and Maki would outright lose. I just think that this is probably, once again, just like Mechamaru, one of those, it gets tougher because of matchup. Uraume has a decently long-range technique that is somewhat problematic, and Toji and Maki would just have to be on their guard from the start. One could argue, though, just based on the extrasensory abilities that Maki displays in her fight with Naoya, can you imagine they sense the temperature drop before the ice actually forms or something like that? And, they're able to, like, narrowly avoid it or something like that just because of the high speed.
That'd be crazy.
Yeah. Either way, I think you would have to argue that they would be able to break out at least once. You would have to think that any of them could. And, I mean, maybe Yuji is able to at one point. The first time he gets frozen, he's able to rip out and break Choso out. And this is obviously a Yuji post Mahito fight, post getting bullied by Kenjaku, right? So
that's their only hope if they
Yeah.
can break out of the ice. If they can't, then
yeah, if they can't,
really have no chance.
then that is a problem, right? And you would,
Yeah.
they would actually lose to Uraume. Although I'm kind of the belief they would be able to. I think they would be able to shatter the
Me too.
ice. And in a physical confrontation, even with Uraume's high level feats, they're not Toji or Maki level. If they get in close, if they're able to press Uraume in an up close quarter combat situation, then I mean I think they're taking it pretty solidly.
Yes.
Yeah. So with that out of the way, next up we have Charles, and Charles is in a hacks category exclusively. His physical abilities are nothing to really make note of. The reason I have him so high up here is just because, similar to someone like Kurara, I just like his technique. And I think it at least provides like some interesting discussion to be had just because of the future sight ability or whatever, being able to see into the future against a physical opponent. I guess he somewhat presses Hikari in base in their fight.
Yeah, even with the 2-second future sight, he is able to start catching up. But the one thing that is shown, I mean, even with Hikari, just like if you have the speed and the kind of power to like, and the reflexes to just confuse your enemy, I mean, even with the 2-second future sight, it just seems like Charles' fighting ability, at least at this point, isn't up to par.
Yeah.
Maybe, but it does show quite a potential for the future.
Yeah, it definitely does show that potential. G ward staff is like a pretty good thing. I don't think it would ever get to this point, but just in a hypothetical where he's gained 4, 5, 6 seconds into the future, I could see it starting to make up for that level of speed gap where he's basically predicting someone's entire combat strategy before it happens. I could definitely see that making an impact, but I think me and you would both agree it would never get to that point. He would never land enough hits to build up that high level. But, you know, Charles is definitely an interesting character to think about when dealing with close quarters combat characters like this. Next up on the list, we have Harta. And you're going to notice a little bit of a running theme where these characters are being carried a lot, at least by interest of their hat. Let's say Harta comes in here with all 6 miracles. He's surviving 6 near-death experiences, I guess, right? So that's something.
His goal is to get away as quick as possible before he loses all of his miracles.
Yeah, because, I mean, what would essentially happen is like a recreation of what happened versus Nanami. He's going to pull up. He's going to slice him, kick him, think it's a brick wall, and then he's just going to get pummeled around. I think the only difference is that Toji and Maki are not going to be as lenient as Nanami. Nanami kicked him away, right, and kind of just left him there, maybe assuming he was incapacitated or dead. Toji and Maki will make sure that he gets the job done. You know what I mean? We saw versus Gojo. He's very thorough with his kills when he tries to be.
Yeah, 100%. They're gonna leave no trace behind.
Basically, what's gonna happen? Haruta goes in there, almost dies again, and rinse and repeat for like 4 other times. Yeah, with that out of the way, next up we have Awasaka. Awasaka is an interesting one because his ability is just kind of broken in a lot of close quarter scenarios. You know what I mean? The ability to just completely invert that damage or invert it to a very high level extent. Obviously, he's just outright tanking blows from Yuji and Divine Dog without any damage.
It's something that Maki and Toji would definitely need to, it would take them a little bit of time to figure out because they'd be like, what is going on? I'm hitting this guy as hard as I can.
Yeah, I'm hitting him really hard, and he's not only not taking that much damage, he's just kind of like eating it and countering. I mean, he got slammed by Yuji 41 stories onto the ground, and then just got up and was like, okay, all right, you got me. You figured out that I was fine. There is an interesting thing that Megumi says, that there are obviously limits to the inverse. You know, there isn't an infinite amount of damage he could take. There are higher limits. Do you think that Toji and Maki would be able to brute force their way through inverse? Are they characters that are physically strong enough to just supersede the level of power that is the physical requirement for Awasaka's inverse? Or do you think that even they are too weak to get past it?
Well, it's interesting that you asked that because I was kind of thinking this as well. Specifically when it comes to the Soul Liberation Blade, do you think its ability to ignore durability, do you think that plays into the inverse? Do you think that would just completely ignore that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Soul Liberation, I think that ability probably sidesteps it altogether. It would probably just interact with it in the same way like a hot knife through butter would be.
Yeah.
If like Awasaka's conventional durability is super high, soul liberation would just be like, okay, I'm not attacking you really physically, I'm cutting your soul. And then obviously that would result in Awasaka, you know, being sliced and diced. So soul liberation definitely would be that counter. If you want to argue somehow they're not able to figure out exactly what his technique is, I mean, Maki uses that blade just in character all the time. You know what I mean? Like that's just her weapon of choice. And Toji, he has inverted Spear of Heaven too, right? So that would negate it as well. Like 2 out of the 4 or 5 cursed tools or weapons that he usually brings out just directly counter Awasaka and all of his abilities, and Maki's soul liberation does, or just, you know, just by nature of it cutting the soul. So even if their physical punching power isn't enough to put him down, their cursed tools definitely would be able to.
Exactly. Like I was just gonna say too, like maybe bare hands, bare knuckle blasting, they may not be able to take him out, but once they start using their cursed tools, it's game over. Like it's just gonna completely flat out just cut right through that inverse like it didn't even exist. They won't even need to figure it out.
Yeah, 100%. Next up here, we have an interesting, a little rematch almost. Seance Ogami. We got the one that brought Toji into Shibuya in the first place. This is just a funny one I wanted to put up here just for the thematic relevance of it. Toji was revived.
Tragic.
Yeah, Toji was revived and returned the favor by taking her out of the game.
Oh, with his bare hands, he didn't have to do her like that either.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. I wonder, and like obviously I think we agree she gets bodied, but I wonder if she had any other sorcerers or high-level characters outside of Toji that she could have summoned.
That's interesting to think about. To think like, do you think there's anyone that she could have summoned that would also compare with Toji though?
No. Unless she got to bring somebody from the Heian era or whatever.
Even then, from what we've seen in the Culling games, it's still a toss-up.
Yeah, exactly. It would still be tough. You would have to bring some of the best of the best. You wouldn't be able to bring just some average sorcerer. Maybe she brings out some grade 1, some random person. Cool. Toji will fold them and her. So she gets taken out again by Toji. And then we move on to the next one with Ogi, another rematch of sorts, where Ogi is going to be facing his worst nightmare twice in Maki and Toji again.
We saw how the first one went, so yeah. I don't know if we're going to get any different result.
Yeah. Ogi's going to bring out that blazing courage only to be taken out again. Toji's going to have him crapping himself, and so is Maki. Moving on to the next one, we have Takaba. This one is actually interesting. This one is like a character that I find to be a little bit of a wild card in this matchup. Yes. Because, I mean, everybody that's familiar with Takaba has, you know, they know the narrator statement. He has a technique that can even rival that of Gojo. It's in that echelon of power where if he finds it funny, yeah, it's happening. So, I gotta ask you, do you see a reality where Takaba unironically beats both of them?
My question is kind of the same as it was before. How do you think the Soul Liberation Blade handles his curse technique? Do you think his ability to just find, like, do you think he'd be able to be like, it'd be funny if this sword just didn't work on me? And even though the sword is meant to completely, ignore durability and just slice through people's souls, do you think his curse technique would be able to stop that?
Yeah, so I honestly, unlike Awasaka, I genuinely think that he may end up having a similar interaction with it that he did with Hazanoki. In the same way that Hazanoki will be shooting out massive explosions of cursed energy, and Takaba's just like, no damage or whatever. I could honestly, especially with like how potent it's implied to be, it's something that's capable of opposing the strongest character in the verse.
Which is just insane, by the way.
It's wild. It wouldn't be crazy to think that Toji and Maki slice him. He just comes out and maybe he jokingly has like a small cut or something, as he does with Hazanoki. Like he comes out with no damage, quote unquote, as he's bleeding from his head a little bit. But he probably wouldn't take significant damage so long as he thought there was a joke to tell in there, corny as it may be, which is a crazy idea. To think about Takaba just tanking Toji and Maki's strongest attacks. But, I mean...
It's possible.
It's possible. That's what's crazy. It's possible.
literally anything is possible with his technique, and that's what the scary part is. It's like we're sitting here and like we're debating this, and it's like of all the people on this list, all the scary motherfuckers, all the people that have these crazy curse techniques, all these people that have trained for years, this guy who could just literally walk up and be like, you know what, I think it'd be funny if I just mollywopped you right now.
Yeah.
And like, you know what, he could just do it. It's just, I don't even know what to say.
It's insane. I think honestly, right, you got two options for a win, right? One is, good old inverted Spear of Heaven. If you negate the technique, then, problem solve. You're kind of stopping the problem at the source, and then Takaba's just, a corny comedian. Cool, whatever. You got your problem solved, right? Or you just have to argue that they just gotta beat him up before he could he could think of a joke. That's it. Those are your options. Beat him up before he can find something to be funny, or literally Control-Alt-Delete comedian. You know what I mean? Outside of that, as crazy as it is to say, Takaba probably
at least draws.
Yeah,
he may not get the W.
Yeah,
but he may be able to make it a stalemate.
Yeah. They might. They're just going back and forth. So it's like, alrighty, yeah, I don't care anymore. Whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you know what? Maybe he does win by default.
Yeah. So he's just like, cool, whatever. I'm done. I'll see you later. The money is.
They would give up. They'd be like, this isn't even worth it.
Yeah. They wouldn't have. They would probably just be annoyed. Like they're just such stoic characters by nature that they're. His corniness is gonna be like, you know what? I can't kill you, and you're annoying. Yeah, whatever.
Oh no, that would just start its own spin-off series, and they would. Oh Jesus.
Yeah. So, win con, inverted Spear of Heaven, draw, or that's it. That's kind of how it goes for them. Now, the next one up on the list is Angel, and I have her here because a lot of it is speculative on her power and just how she interacts with characters, but the idea that she thinks she could take out Sukuna is one that is interesting to play around with. Her mission, her creed being to eliminate Sukuna from the Culling game, or the fallen one, which obviously we know to be him. Do you think that it implies a certain level of power?
I think that strictly applies to her curse technique, which is the ability to extinguish other curse techniques, right? I really don't feel like her being the only person that's been known to actually be capable of removing Sukuna from existence has anything to do with her martial arts ability.
Yeah.
Or like anything to do with how strong of a fighter she is. I mean, she even is the one that asks Yuji and Megumi if they can get Sukuna for her. I feel like Sukuna's only afraid of her for the mere sense that her curse technique is OP in the sense, if she gets you, I mean, that's it. You have nothing. You have no curse technique. You may even, depending on the way that Higuruma describes it, losing your curse technique, your entire curse energy manipulation as a whole may be thrown out of whack.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I could see that as being something, anyone would be scared of. Sukuna would be right to be scared of it.
For sure.
So that being said, on the flip side, for someone like Maki or Toji, unless he really is talking about her martial arts ability or her ability as a fighter in general besides the extinguishing, I feel like Maki and Toji are just flat out a full-on counter.
It's definitely something to keep in mind. Her main, at least so far, the main selling point of Angel has been her extinguishing ability, and to somewhat counter the idea that Sukuna is scared of her in a more general sense. I mean, she leaves Tokyo Colony 2 in part because Kashimo's there. So unless you think Kashimo is out here just 1v1ing a full 20-finger Sukuna and just like catching a W, which I'm not mad at you, I like Kashimo too, unless you think that, Angel doesn't really have that much to imply that in a fair 1v1, both characters are bringing out their full capabilities, she's beating Sukuna. So yeah, I'm in agreement with you. Unless you think Sukuna is scared of her as a fighter, which really doesn't make sense for his character and for all of the narrative implications surrounding him, then yeah, Angel would lose to Toji and Maki all the same.
Yeah, press X to doubt.
Now, next up on the list, we have Todo, a pretty interesting character, well-beloved character amongst the fan base, if I may. Thoughts?
I feel like that's definitely a fun fight. Like I can see like Todo definitely like doing his best with Boogie Woogie and any kind of way, because he definitely has a high battle IQ, and that's one thing that Todo always has for him, and in any situation that he finds himself in, he'll definitely be able to play ball for a little bit. But I just feel like in a battle of attrition, and that's going to be what it really comes down to with a lot of these other people, where they'll be able to step up a good fight and trick Maki or Toji up for a decent amount of time, but how much time is that really?
Yeah.
Is the question.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. The question is, how long does it take for Toji and Maki to get used to Boogie Woogie? Because Todo can't use it on them, right? Which is a big disadvantage. It simply won't work on them. He has to use like rocks that he imbues with cursed energy, and like he'd have to spread out things on the battlefield himself, which is definitely a big disadvantage. He's also alone in this fight, which typically lowers the efficacy of Boogie Woogie. It's not to sneeze at his physical strength or anything. He's kind of relative to Yuji towards the end of Shibuya, but it's not enough. Just that level of ability and a technique that is maybe even half of its usual efficiency is not going to be enough to take down both of them.
Counter that I didn't even think of. That's huge. That, like, he can't even use Toji to switch between, so he's only, depending on the environment, he may, you know, if he fights, you know, Toji in like the grand tournament arena in Dragon Ball.
Yeah, he may be a huge problem. Massive problem. Probably up to this point, one of the best, just because physically he's one of the stronger characters we've talked about so far, but not doing that crazy. Speaking of physical characters, let's get into one of the physical characters, right? This whole shtick, Yuji Itadori. That guy, him. Now, this one's interesting to me because Yuji would do nothing but fight on their turf. Like, they'd be fighting on each other's turf, right? It's like, yeah, he wants to get up close, and so do they. And this would probably be one of the first examples where Yuji gets into like a close quarters confrontation that he has no hopes of winning.
I think Itadori's feats and just like what has been said about him, I feel like he's even been compared to the level of power of someone with heavenly restriction. I don't know when they say that if they're specifically referencing someone like Toji. Bear in mind that. But I definitely think his speed and his power just in the physical are nothing to scoff at. I think he definitely would be able to meet them at almost every turn. But you think that he doesn't really, you think this would be the first one where he's just outclassed completely physically?
Yeah. So usually, right, even when we see fights, like the reason Yuji loses is because he's like out hacks or his physical abilities can't compensate for the abilities that his opponents have, like Choso versus Yuji, for example, right? Physically, he's on his level, if not above, but he's kind of losing out because Choso has a lot of hacks and he catches him off guard, right? I think if he gets close to Toji and Maki, he's probably losing. I guess some of the reason for that is just some of the things they pull off, right? So
bear in mind here, this is the Yuji that literally punched a grade 1 cursed spirit into the wall like it was nothing.
For sure. 100%.
Go ahead. I just wanted to remind you what you're talking about.
Yeah, for sure. Yuji's not weak, right? He's punching around cars. He's fighting against Yuta, right? Yuta's like, I didn't expect you to be this fast. All that kind of stuff. Very powerful. He's compared and put above like a pre-awakened Maki pretty soundly throughout the arc, or throughout like all of his time after his training, right? The narrator even says he's like more athletic than Maki, obviously referring to her like pre-awakening, all that kind of stuff, right? Very impressive fighter. But one thing I reference a lot is just his initial performance, or even Choso's initial performance, like you could use to scale back to Yuji versus someone like Naoya versus Maki's and by proxy's Toji. Maki took on an entire clan, including Naoya, right after being injured, all this different stuff. I don't know if I think Yuji's doing the same thing. I don't know if I think Yuji's pulling up on even Naoya by himself and being like, run the ones and then coming out on top. But that may be where we differ quite a bit.
I think so. I think the main thing that sets Maki and Toji apart from Yuji is their weapons.
Okay.
I feel like, you know, brought with the cursed tools and everything, I mean, Yuji doesn't really stand much of a chance.
Yeah.
But I see what you're saying where Yuji does kind of get perception blitzed by Naoya, at least when he first shows up, but that's also when he's caught off guard. I feel like one-to-one, if they were well aware that they're going into this fight, I do think Yuji loses at the end of the day, but I don't think it would be as easy in the physical department as you appear to believe.
For sure.
I think Yuji does have a little bit more tank, a little bit more of that durability, a little bit more of that physical capability to match someone like Toji or Maki in hand to hand, especially with the fact that I feel like someone like Yuji might even be more technical. physical. I feel like, compared to maybe someone like Maki, maybe, you know what? Maybe I'm kind of talking out of my ass here a little bit because I am thinking about it. Toji and Maki are kind of martial arts gods.
Yeah,
So,
they're war gods on the battlefield. Like, yeah, for sure.
So I definitely think he loses, but I think Yuji would probably be the best close quarters hand-to-hand fighter that they would have until you bring someone up that
until you bring up higher levels, for sure.
Until you bring someone up that changes my mind. I think right now and probably for the next like 10, 15 people you bring up, I think Yuji is the best physical combat they have.
Yeah, and I would agree. I think Yuji out of the characters, probably just because of the simplicity, probably does some of the best against them, puts up the most trouble.
If I may argue for Yuji one more time.
For sure.
The one thing also is when Yuji fights Yuta, the biggest thing that trips him up is the fact that Yuta's cursed energy control and just the fact of how much he has makes it hard to predict where Yuta can go. So Yuji, being someone who is more hand-to-hand capability and kind of focuses and uses more of that for his combat senses, would probably be a much more better fight for someone like Toji or Maki, where most sorcerers are using their cursed energy to perception sense.
Yeah.
Whereas someone like Yuji is going to be more used to the actual hand-to-hand combat style of perception. You could probably, I'm sure people will disagree with me in the comments there, but 100%. I also feel like that's something Yuji has going for him that probably most other people don't have whatsoever.
I think you brought up some fair points for Yuji. I would definitely say that out of the people brought up so far, in terms of hands, it's almost completely undebatable that anybody's doing better, right? He's going to put up the biggest fight, and I think we agree that the outcome is the same. However, the difficulty that it takes is where we differ a little bit. Either way, I think we see Toji and Maki coming out on top. And for the next one, we have Megumi Fushiguro, a character not quite as strong, but on the opposite end where he has just a lot of hacks, just a lot of abilities at his disposal.
And his domain actually works against them.
Yeah, no sure hit, no barrier either, so they kind of have to participate. And this is an interesting one because we've kind of seen this fight. We've seen it under strange circumstances. Megumi is nerfed from his domain and Toji is dead and revived and going on instinct and things like that. How do you think it changes from what we saw on screen in Shibuya?
I mean, the main thing that we saw from Megumi in the Culling game was his ability to I don't want to say escape or flee because that's not what he did, but to evade. Just all these kind of different things. Like Reggie was literally once again throwing literal Mack trucks at this man. And kind of just like throwing a bunch of random things that you definitely wouldn't be able to account for. And he was able to use his ability to kind of escape any way that he possibly could. And we also saw that a little bit when he did fight Toji in Shibuya, where he was able to stop a point blank stab, just barely, but was still able to do it. So I definitely think he has the wit and the battle intelligence to kind of fight someone like this. I don't think he has any kind of power to back it up or actually pull a win out.
Yeah.
Because even with his domain expansion and the kind of overwhelming intensity that he can bring against someone like Toji or Maki with how much he can just multiply and just clone things, I don't know. How do you think they'd fare in a situation like that?
So I honestly am looking back at the fight and I'm looking at it and like Megumi is holding back a lot of the abilities that he typically has. A lot of his like go-tos, the main one being Divine Dog. We see in the Reggie fight that Divine Dog seems to be on a completely different level than most of the Shikigami Megumi pulls out. Reggie's like, as long as it's not Divine Dog, as long as that Shikigami does not come out, I win. Any other one, I beat him, it doesn't matter. And the fact that he doesn't use it against Toji, it's not to say that it would make the difference of him winning, but I'm curious what a Shikigami that can hurt special grades, that can assist Megumi in dodging things typically faster than themselves when combined with all of his other abilities. He throws in Max Elephant to throw off the terrain, all these different abilities. I think it would be an interesting fight. I think the question would be, how long do you think Megumi lasts rather than does he win? I think that's kind of the question we end up asking ourselves. And if he does pull out the domain, he does clone himself, he's got 3 Megumis and some new A's and all of these other abilities. I think that's probably where Toji or Maki would be, where they have those whited out eyes and they have those crazy smiles and then they get serious for a second. That's probably how I think the reaction would be, is like, oh, okay, we're
gotta turn up real quick.
I gotta turn up real quick. I gotta show you why this restriction heavenly for real. and then you beat him up. But I honestly think Megumi and Yuji respectively kind of are the ones that so far create the like toughest battles, but for completely different reasons, interestingly enough. So for sure, Megumi definitely loses, but I think with his full power, full stamina, he definitely make it a bit more troublesome for them to deal with.
Definitely. His main source of his main source of profit for stocks is his domain.
Yeah.
But just against Toji or Maki, like you said, they've got that. They're menacing enough to figure it out.
Yeah. Next up, we have Higuruma. This is an interesting one that we were actually kind of discussing a little bit before we got into the video, just because, you know, we wanted to see if we were on the same page. And this is one that is kind of determined based on your interpretation of how his domain works. Depending on how far you think the abilities stretch and like how they interact with Toji and Maki, it can go as far as Higuruma gets washed super easily with no real room for debate, considering physically he's not even completely outmatching a cursed energyless Yuji, to, oh wow, this is a very tough pitched battle, to even like they're losing. So I don't know if you want to discuss some of the possibilities that his domain can present if he opens it on them.
Yeah, well, I feel like, and we both kind of agreed on this in our previous conversation, where the tough part with Higuruma is that most of his technique revolves around his domain expansion. It revolves around the punishment aspect of his domain, which allows him to take advantage in a fight like that. The tough part that we both kind of settled on was that what really is Higuruma able to confiscate from Toji or Maki. Like we talked about, like, really they have no cursed energy. I mean, would it be like unable to use your curse tools? Even then, they're still kind of monstrous.
Yeah.
And we kind of played with the idea of like, would he be able to take away their heavenly restriction? Which, and we both kind of agreed that that's a little bit too much.
Yeah.
A little bit. We don't think that Higuruma's domain would be capable of doing something like that. So his main struggle really comes to his whole shtick, you know, literally is this domain. And if he can't confiscate and get that advantage, then like you said, he barely outclassed Yuji. He's not standing up against Toji or Maki. He has nothing to stop them.
Yeah, 100%. So opening the domain, it working on them, possible. And let's, like, for charity's sake, say it is, right? Higuruma is safe in his domain. They can't enact any violence. Like No Operator was saying, we don't really have, or rather he doesn't really have a way to deal with them after the fact. Sure, Maki and Toji have committed plenty of crimes that they could be charged for, right? But who really cares if, you know, nothing gets confiscated, right? If after the fact nothing happens. Maybe the best case scenario, that's actually something I just thought of, right, is maybe in that type of situation, it skips straight to the death penalty. So they don't need to confiscate, or he doesn't need to confiscate anything, and he just has that sword. But even then, it would just be, if the rules have to be like known and established, Toji and Maki are absolutely not letting that hit them. It's just not happening.
And this is all, once again, going off of the fact that this is even if Maki or Toji let themselves into his domain.
Yeah, they don't have to. They can just say, no, I'm good. And Higuruma would just have to hold that and fight them outside of it. The best he can do outside of it is have a shape-shifting hammer and some pretty decent physical stats, which are not enough to back up a fight against either of these two, like, demonic fighters.
Yeah, I mean, I even think it's like a kind of the point where they negate it enough where they actually would be able to commit violence in the domain. Higuruma just like summons his domain, like, you can't do anything here. And they're like, all right, bet.
And then they just, punch him in the face, take him out. They're like, yeah, okay, sure. So yeah, either way, even if you're very charitable to Higuruma, the fight does not end up going his way at all. Now, next up, we have Naoya and Naobito, and these two characters are just lumped in together because they have the same technique. Their fighting style revolves around basically the same thing. And while I would probably say Naobito is stronger and faster than human, like Sorcerer Naoya, I would say they're like, I mean, it's fair enough to lump them in together because the end result is pretty similar. Do you think Naobito specifically poses any trouble for either of these two?
I definitely can see like Naobito and Toji specifically having some sort of level of like mutual respect and mutual like acknowledgement of each other's abilities to where they're like, one of them's like, okay, I won't fuck with you if you won't fuck with me. Even though most likely Toji probably could be the one that would get the victory at the end. I definitely see projection sorcery, as we even saw with Naoya's battle with Maki, or at least when he was in his human form. It can trip them up.
Yeah.
It can definitely present a problem for them. Whether it's as much of a problem after, you know, Maki gets her soul sight.
Yeah.
Like, and she's able to even like probably better understand the frames aspect of the projection sorcery technique. I still can see like the kind of speed boost and the kind of just overall trickery that it can do, kind of messing them up after a while.
For sure. And I mean, you have stuff like Dagon saying that Naobito might be faster than Jogo. And depending on how you feel about the Toji Jogo debate, which is something that I see people still arguing sometimes. Yeah, you may think that Naobito is faster. The one pretty solid thing in Toji's favor, right? The one thing I would just say is Ranta's statement that Toji at any point could have soloed the clan. They're alive based off of his whim, considering the fact that when Toji was alive, Naobito was also alive. That probably implies that Toji could have taken the entire clan, including Naobito, although I imagine, I'm kind of with you where I think Naobito versus Toji would be like a Maki versus Naoya situation where Toji just gets finished ravaging the rest of the clan. He's walking through, he's got all their blood on him, and he's just like, oh, okay, final boss time, cool. Because like, Naobito's very fast, very powerful. I probably think his biggest problem is his finishing power, because he couldn't really do all that much to someone like Dagon, and if he can't do that much to Dagon, I struggle to think of a way he would severely injure Maki or Toji.
Mm-hmm. And even like I just said, how like it could present somewhat of an issue after being able to like figure it out, like. It may seem like Maki's getting knocked around constantly, but like you can even see like she's just biding her time.
Yeah.
She's just counting those frames. She's like, all right, knock me around, beat my ass. Like, don't worry about it. You'll get yours in 1 second.
Yeah.
And she does, you know what I mean? Like, that's the one thing that just, the durability is just, it's so hard for like, and going off what you just said, where they don't really have any kind of finishing techniques or any capability to really deal like a critical blow that's possible to really take Toji or Maki out before they can get that upper hand on them.
For sure, 100%. Like, I would definitely say Maki and Toji at this point, Maki especially, should just be familiar with how projection sorcery works. She should just know 24 movements in a second. The only problem may be that Naobito might be more proficient with it than Naoya was as a human. But like you said, with that extra soul sensory ability, with all the new things they're kitted out with, their first tools, which basically allow them to one-hit kill their opponents, it's probably going to be something that goes in their favor. Maybe, like, I think we'd be in agreement that these probably are the toughest characters that they'd be fighting up to this point.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. Overall, yes.
Now, kicking the level of opponents up a notch, let's talk about Uro. She's an interesting case, and I'm kind of curious how you think her hacks would interact with Toji and Maki.
I think it'd be very interesting to see how like she'd be able to manipulate the space around them to kind of like dodge their like attacks and like kind of just like throw them off. But I just don't see. I mean, the tough part is like not knowing what her domain expansion actually is.
Yeah,
too. It makes it kind of hard to like scale what she'd be able to do if she did go all out in a fight to like the death. But I honestly, like, while the technique can present definitely a lot of issues, like I feel like once again it's just not enough.
Yeah, I will say probably her best bet is an initial rush against them before they understand the technique, because her thin ice missile, Yuta needed to use reverse curse technique after getting hit with that, and that's a pretty big feat in my mind. Hitting him so hard, he's like, oh wow, that's a solid punch you got there. That's a pretty good feat that shouldn't be ignored. I think before they understand the technique fully, how much damage can she do? She can damage them enough to where they're below their typical level of output. They're like really weakened. Maybe you'd have an argument, but I'd still be with you where, yeah, she's strong, very, very powerful. Her hacks are probably troublesome for them to deal with, especially at first when they're still like understanding like what the limits of her distortion ability are. But I mean, especially with Inverted Spear of Heaven, it's like, okay, cool. I've dealt with space manipulation before. Let's do it again.
Yeah, with curse tools, it just doesn't. It just doesn't add up. Unfortunately, it's not enough with it. If barehanded, sure, I could see the space manipulation or sky manipulation doing something to where like they have to, you know, work around the box. But with curse tools, no.
Yeah. Now, next up here, we have the luckiest man alive, Kinji Hikari. And this is another one that is hinged quite a bit upon hacks and how you think those hacks interact with the characters, because...
Controversial.
Yeah. I'm going to be honest with you. Like, I think me and Norbert both agree. Hikari in base is not doing anything. How he starts off a fight, like how he did versus, like, Charles, who cares? Maki and Toji beat that up really quickly, right? The main event, right? The way he becomes, like a special grade level opponent is through his domain and is through being on a roller in his jackpot form. And I'm kind of the opinion, and I think no operator agrees with me here, that it doesn't really matter that Toji and Maki are immune to domains, right? It doesn't matter that they don't have to enter domains. They can choose to. Hikari's ability isn't super reliant on attacking his opponent. It's just I just need this barrier to gamble. I need this domain to gamble and get like my jackpot. That's kind of,
you think Hikari can domain himself? Like, even if they say no, Hikari can just summon the domain.
Yeah, just keep the domain open
himself.
I wonder. That's honestly an interesting thing. Although you may be able to argue that might be a limitation on it, like sort of an almost like implicit binding vow where somebody has to be able to attack him. Because if not, why would Hikari not go into a fight already having it? You know what I mean? With no pressure. It's definitely something you can go back and forth on. I think just like we've been doing with a lot of the other characters that are somewhat like up in the air, being charitable to Hikari, you could say that, yeah, it still gets off anyways. And this is where it gets really fun and interesting to me, at least. Jackpot Hikari versus Toji and Maki. How far do you think that goes either way? Because this is one of the first ones on the list, I think, where we're like, oh, Toji and Maki legitimately, depending on where you think they scale, like have an argument for losing. Like they have an argument against them pretty solidly. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, so I think Hikari is probably one of the first people I would say actually presents as much of, if not maybe a little bit less, or like I said, the same quality kind of physical combat as Yuji, especially when it comes to jackpotted Hikari. I think he definitely is able to keep up, as we see in his fight with Kashimo. He's able to do some crazy shit. He's able to throw, he's able to volley a cargo hold, back and forth with Kashimo. Like, he's able to basically sprint and like go through kinds of crazy speeds. He's capable of a lot of things when he has the his boss music playing in the background.
Yeah, for sure.
So I definitely can see him presenting a decent amount of fight, especially with his advanced reverse curse technique. And the reason why I say advanced is because it's on a level that we've literally never seen before. It's literally comparable to like a cursed spirit's regeneration, like almost instant. So like that's also a big issue, is even if Toji and Maki land critical hits on Hikari, it's not going to do much for long. I mean, Hikari loses an arm, and then before Kashimo can even like balance himself after getting kicked, like Hikari's already regrew the arm. And he's punching him in the face with it. So like that's gonna be one of the biggest things that they can handle with. And like I guess what it also comes down to is do you think that Toji or Maki would have that pre-knowledge that Kashimo does to, all right, I've got to focus on the head and not waste time dealing with any other hits?
Yeah, so it's an interesting one because we see in like the flashback, Toji seems to be somewhat familiar with the reverse curse technique. When Gojo's talking about it and he points towards his head, Toji instantly like, oh shit. And because he knew what it was without it even being mentioned, I would venture to say that Toji knows what reverse curse technique is and probably how to deal with it.
I think Toji has a much larger chance of doing it. He seems like someone that, like, growing up with heavily restriction, he, like, was like, okay, like, I've got to find every way I can to have an advantage to cover up my disadvantage.
For sure,
It just kind of seems like the kind of character that he was. Like, he seemed very knowledgeable. Every situation he was in, he was, like, had the perfect answer for it. Whereas someone like Maki may not have that same level of knowledge. So I feel like that's something that Toji would definitely have a upper hand on her on, at least in this circumstance against this opponent. Toji may be much better prepared to handle something like this than Maki.
Yeah, that requires a lot of knowledge, for sure. We kind of know, or at least pretty heavily like implied or mentioned over and over again, that reverse curse technique cannot heal soul manipulation damage or like soul damage in general. How do you think that, like, do you think soul splitter, like a soul splitter attack, would not be able to be healed by Hikari? Like, do you think reverse curse technique heals the soul as well as the body?
That's a really good question. That is a really good question, because I don't think in Hidden Inventory Arc we see anything get hit by the Soul Liberation Blade that gets recovered or regenerated. Because anytime that Toji actually attacks Geto or Gojo, he does it with a regular sword, or with the Inverted Spear of Heaven, or with like that tiny little like nail thing he like stabs Gojo in the brain with.
For sure.
It makes it really hard. Like that's actually a good question, because like we talked about when it comes to going against Mahito, it's like, Mahito can't regenerate because that's his whole thing. He wouldn't be able to regenerate part of his soul. But a sorcerer, that's a really good question.
The reason I asked is because it stated that Sukuna can't fix Idol Transfiguration because it deals with the soul. So I'm like, okay, if Sukuna can't use it, right? And this isn't to say Sukuna has better reverse curse technique than Hikari, as shown, right? There are some limitations that reverse curse technique generally has that Hikari's doesn't. But I wonder if Like, soul damage is just something that can't be fixed, because it's not like reverse throws technique is infallible. Yuki even mentions that, like, it can't even heal something like burn scars, right? Like, it can't get rid of those. So I wonder if something like soul damage from their soul splitter is something that Hikari's could even heal. It's an interesting topic, and I think if you argue that it can't heal that, then you have a pretty simple win con that Hikari just takes damage like he would normally, except he's just way stronger, but that healing factor would be almost completely eliminated. If not, though, you would have to argue that they just last long enough to kill him in between jackpots, which is also a very possible thing. I mean, Hikari's made it pretty known that he is vulnerable in those in-between moments. What do you think about that? Like, do you think when he opens second domain, for example, that Toji and Maki would have the presence of mind and ability to take him out before he gets another one?
110%, especially with knowing that this is their one chance to land it. I guess it depends on how quick. I mean, I guess almost every domain that Hikari does depends on how quick he actually lands the jackpot. Because like when he domains right before he's about to die, when Kashimo strikes him with lightning, he lands it almost immediately. Whereas when he first throws Kashimo into the domain, they have to fight back and forth before he actually lands it.
Yeah.
So I guess it depends on literally Hikari's luck for that day. And I feel like we kind of stumbled upon something that is a huge contender in the fight, because I'm even imagining it like almost like when like the third Hokage takes out Orochimaru's arms. Like if the Soul Liberation Blade cuts off that arm, is that arm literally incapable of being healed?
Yeah, and if it is, they won, right?
Yeah, I feel like that is a huge, that makes a huge difference, because if that's the case, they have no choice, because even if Hikari becomes immortal with Jackpot, it doesn't make a lick of a difference whatsoever.
Yeah, he just has more cursed energy, and he gets a little bit, like, well, not a little bit, he gets a lot stronger, right? But the main thing about Hikari here is that he's unkillable. Like, that's his biggest, I think everybody would agree, right? That is his biggest upside with his jackpot. It is, you cannot kill him by conventional means. Poison doesn't work. Blowing him up doesn't work. You have to take off his head, and even that is tough. You'd have to remove it, right? Which is possible. Like, I definitely think it's something they could do, but I personally think Toji might go for the head mid-fight, and Maki might have to just wait a little bit extra time and then just go for him immediately after his domain. And I think, I don't know, I'm kind of the belief that, for the most part, Hikari's is going to take a little bit. Not super long, not more than 30 rolls, I think is what he says, but enough time for someone as fast as Maki to react, you know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. I think Maki and Toji get the win regardless of what the Soul Liberation Blade and what your interpretation of that is. But like we said, like the fact that he stays in base until he gets that jackpot, that's when he's going to be most vulnerable. And that's when both Toji and Maki have, I mean, however long it needs for them to get it. And even if he does land the immortality, we have the interpretation of how the Soul Liberation Blade works. There really isn't any contention that either Maki or Toji could survive the 4 minutes and 11 seconds. Yeah. Because we know they could. I don't see any problem with that. And then at that point, Hikari then has to redomain and hope he can then re-hit a it's too many steps, and it becomes, once again, like we said before, a battle of attrition, to which in those kinds of battles, Toji and Maki are almost always going to be the winner, because even if Maki knows she doesn't have to take out this motherfucker's head, eventually she's going to be like, when he doesn't die long enough, she's going to be like, I'm just going to take out this guy's head just because he's not dying.
Yeah, remove it. Like, here's the thing, like, it would just be process of elimination, right? It'd be like, okay, cool, if his body won't do whatever, I'm taking his head. If he can heal from that, I might just lose, but I gotta take his head, right?
I'm mounting him on my wall, even if he's still alive. He can just talk a lot. You know?
So yeah, 100%. I think Hikari is a pretty difficult fight, but in the end, I think Maki and Toji would probably take that.
I think he stands a little bit better, as much, if not a little bit of a better chance than as Naobito or Naoya.
Oh, yeah. For sure. Now, next up on the list, we have Ishigori, the character with the highest cursed energy output in history. Like, I don't know how you feel about Ishigori, but man, is he a tank. He's a tank, and he just be outputting ridiculous amounts of energy.
For me, what it really comes down to, honestly, I don't think he's that scary for Maki or Toji, in my personal opinion. I think Ishigori is a monster, don't get me wrong. I definitely think he's high up there in the power scaling. But for me, it's kind of the same thing as like base Hikari, where even though you put out decent feats, you have great physical stats, and you can put up a decent fight. I guess what my question is how powerful do you think his Granite Blast comes down to? Do you think it's capable of just mauling Toji like a purple is? Or do you think like Toji or Maki can eat a Granite Blast and then keep going? Because if that's the case, if they can, I don't see Ishigori presenting much of a problem at all.
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting question, right? Because I don't think it's a purple, because I think where purple has like a lot of his strength is it's not from the necessarily the amount of cursed energy, right?
It erases matter.
It's a hacks, right? So I don't think it's gonna have that same effect. However, my question is, right, do you think like Toji and Maki could get hit by the Yuta Rika blast right back in Volume 0 and just like tank it? Like how
I don't remember what my opinion was when I did this before.
Right? It's tough. It's interesting because it's like I don't think they die immediately. Like I don't think it's one-shotting them, but I guess the question is how much damage do I think they're taking?
I probably would equivocate that. I don't know if that's the correct word. Don't light me up in the comments if I'm wrong, but I probably would equivocate that to the level of damage as a purple. In my honest opinion, I'd probably say it's just as, even though it's a different kind of like
attack
structure of attack, I still think it's capable of the same kind of damage. So no, I don't think if they ate it point blank, no.
Okay.
I think they would get taken out.
Interesting. Okay, and I'm assuming then, because from you saying they're like Ishigori isn't that scary for him, are you saying that like you think it doesn't get to that, like they take him out, they dodge the Granite Blast, whatever? I think
Ishigori has the potential to hit one of them, especially with how, I mean, he's a good fighter, don't get me wrong. I think he definitely has the ability to set up a perfect opportunity to hit them with a Granite Blast. But this is the same Granite Blast that, granted, it does match a Rika Cursed Energy Blast, but this isn't a Rika Cursed Energy Blast that's powered by a suicidal Binding Vow.
For sure.
So it's also significantly different. Because even Meimei, going back to her, even mentions that that's one of the strongest ways to grow as a sorcerer and increase your power level is to do a Binding Vow with your life. So
that's fair.
I guess that would kind of answer your question as to where I think that the Granite Blast does not put out the same kind of level of power as a purple. So do I think they could come back from a Granite Blast? Most likely. Do I think they'd be heavily damaged from it? Yes. Could they take maybe less? Could they probably take more than 2? No.
Got you. Okay, so it comes down to them taking it up before that. And I think that's fair. Yeah, I don't think domain expansion, just like it was with Uro, I don't think that's much of a problem because it's implied to be like sure hit from the narration that we see in those moments where it's like all these sure hit domains clashing, blah, 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 which means Ishigori could open that and not get anything. And Ishigori also seems to think, based on the fact that like his Granite Blast didn't kill Uro, that after a domain, it gets weaker. So that might even lend to Ishigori like opening the domain for no reason and then getting attacked in a weaker state. So I definitely think this is like, I probably view this as pretty high diff for them. They get hit by a Granite Blast, they're taking some pretty significant damage, but they could still eke it out. Toji has like Chain of 1,000 Miles, which has like ridiculous range. He can tie that together with Inverted Spear of Heaven. He can use a bunch of different things. So for sure, I'm kind of with you on I'm of the belief that Ishigori will lose, but it's a tough battle.
Yeah, I just think Maki and Toji are too squirrely. Like I said, the Granite Blast definitely would do significant damage, but if it's just too tough to hit them. Yeah,
it also shouldn't be understated how difficult it is to like perceive those characters, especially with Toji, right? If he so chooses, you can't sense his cursed energy, right?
The invisible man.
Yeah, he'll just put his cursed tools away, and they'll just be like, all right, I'm just gonna run around. You have to try to keep up with me solely with your eyes or guess, which is just bad, right? Even Maki's probably smart enough to be like, oh, let me just put, if I need to fight this person with my bare hands and catch him off guard, I'll even throw the Soul Splitter, right, as a distraction, so you sense that cursed energy and I just attack because, she has those same like stealth possibilities for sure. Next up, we have Kashimo. I kind of view Kashimo in a similar light I do Ishigori in terms of physical abilities, how they even fight, like their approach to combat and stuff like that. The main difference is that I think the lightning is probably faster, and I'm interested in what you think about how his cursed energy traits deal with those two.
For one, in my personal opinion, I think Kashimo, as far as like martial arts or hand-to-hand goes, I think he's a significant upgrade from Ishigori.
Okay.
Even though Ishigori has like decent physical, combat stats, like I think Kashimo is definitely just has shown a lot more. Like, he's just like, he loves the thrill of the fight. He seems like someone that would be able to, you know, just be a little bit more of a master in that sense. As far as it goes, I agree with you. Lightning definitely a lot faster than Granite Blast and does present a much larger threat. I mean, it was able to snap Hikaru's arm off.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? And he was able to just point a finger and bam. And we've also seen him be able to even do smarter things. Like, he got knocked away from his rod, and he was able to call the stored up electricity that was in the rod from afar and line it up perfectly.
Yeah.
So it's also like, it's not even, he also has plenty of different ways where he can line that up or aim that attack to actually do decent damage.
Yeah, for sure. And if they're focused on fighting him, right, they're struggling, or just like really just putting their all against Kashimo physically. If they get caught in like an off guard lightning bolt, that's bad. If they
let alone if they even know it's coming. So the first time he uses that, if he really gets it perfectly, I mean, that could be it right there.
Yeah, they could literally lose the fight. It doesn't even have to take them out, but it can incapacitate them to where Kashimo just has the overwhelming advantage and would eventually win. That's obviously not even to mention the fact that his cursed energy trait might be a problem. I don't know necessarily where I stand on that. Maybe they have a natural resistance in the same way they do to something like cursed speech. It's possible. But if they don't, also a very like pesky thing to deal with. If he touches you, you're then shocked and like somewhat paralyzed. And that just creates an even like more problematic fighter on your hands.
Yeah, 100%. I would go on the record to say that the cursed energy trait probably would be a big problem for them. I think just the way that we see, like, because like they wouldn't have any natural defense against it, and if anything, that would be one way where Kashimo does have the advantage over them. We see Hikari's only able to ignore Kashimo's cursed energy trait just because he's stat boosted with Jackpot.
Yeah,
he has so much cursed energy flowing through him, it doesn't make a difference. But going up against someone that doesn't have that kind of, you know, defense, I feel like that would be something that kind of presents them with a problem. I mean, honestly, the more we talk about it, I feel like Kashimo's the first person we have here who actually has a chance of actually getting a W.
Yeah, I could see it going both ways, but this is one of those where I'm like, oh, this kind of feels more like a 50-50 like toss-up, you know what I mean? Because like things like Inverted Spear of Heaven have no usage here because Kashimo doesn't use his technique normally. He's probably not going to use it on them anyways, so that doesn't matter. The Soul Splitter Sword's definitely a good option, right? As it is going to be like through this entire thing.
I mean, this man literally, when he got thrown in the water, which probably was the biggest counter to him entirely, where he had no choice but to release all of his cursed energy and probably be taken out of the fight, he said, okay, what's the best way I can make this work for me? And this man created a word that I didn't even know existed until I read that chapter with the electrolysis nonsense, with the chlorine gas. Like, that's like, what kind of craziness? Like, that's some kind of crazy, just, I on what level?
Yeah, very, very ingenious fighter. He's smart,
was willing to blow himself up and just like, and like, even then when his final, like, last explosion didn't work, he still had the determination and just like the gall to be like, all right, even if I don't kill Hikari, I'm still going to take out his arms so he can't domain again.
Yeah.
Even if I have to fight this man with no cursed energy, at least he's coming at me with no domain.
Do you lean any type of direction one way or another? Are you more like Kashimo's winning more times than not, or vice versa?
This is like such a great, like, it really is a great question. I mean, like, this is one of those situations, like you said, it's a 50-50, or like where like it'd be like a 1 out of 10 times, you know, this person wins this amount of times, this person wins this amount of times, just based off of like, it really, I don't know. Yeah, he really is the first character where I'm like, wow, he has a chance.
Yeah. I would probably myself say I'm leaning towards Toji and Maki, strictly because I think Kashimo, honestly, because of the vague amount of time it takes him to charge, lightning bolts can't be spammed, right? Their sensory abilities might allow them, because like Maki's like, I can sense distortions in the air. Something as big as like your static electricity being collected might be something they're both aware of, or at least even if they don't know in what form it's coming, they're like, an attack is coming, let me be wary. And the curse rate thing could be mitigated by using curse tools. They don't have to come into contact with them themselves. So I think it's a tough battle. Like, it is the toughest battle up to this point, just due to the way Kashimo fights and some of his abilities. But I would say out of 10 times they fight, Maki and Toji are winning 6, maybe 7. That's how I view it, right? Kashimo is definitely, in certain scenarios and certain like setups, he's beating them, but I'm definitely, I think, slightly more on the side of Toji and Maki.
I'll undercut you. I think it's a solid 50-50, to be honest.
Fair.
But I think future events will we'll definitely look back on this in like a year and be like, okay,
Yeah,
now
it was confirmed. Yeah, for sure. Now, next up, Yuta Akotsu himself.
So like you already know, like I have gone into this in depth. And like even especially now with all the new developments that we have, I'm still a changed man, and I still think Yuta can come out with the W.
Yeah, and I think I would agree with you. I think I would agree with you because I don't think they're physically strong enough to like vastly overwhelm him to the point where like the hacks are meaningless. He has Rika. Rika's strong enough to go back and forth with Ishigori. She can stop Granite Blast with her bare hands. So can Yuta. And just that alone being tag teamed by both of them would be crazy. In terms of a war of attrition.
Rika, in my opinion, is what allows you, because Yuta, I guess, kind of, in my opinion, is lower in stats, at least physically, but Rika is what picks the slack back up for him, because Toji or Maki isn't just fighting Yuta.
Yeah.
They're fighting, Rika, who can also provide backup support, while Yuta also is maybe not as strong, but can definitely put up a decent back and forth, like hand-to-hand wise with them. I think
for sure.
Wise.
This is definitely one where, you have the curse tool arsenal that he can pull from. You have Rika being able to just be like a super dominant, very powerful opponent. Now you have him kitted out with sky manipulation. He's just very, very powerful all around, and it's like a very difficult person to deal with. I think this is probably the first one where I say, yeah, this character just is like it's more dominant in their conflict, right? I would say I have Yuta like winning more times than not against them. And you would say you would agree?
I agree. He just has so much at his disposal to use against Maki or Toji. And like I said, with his boundless curse energy, he also has the kind of durability where he'd be able to take any kind of damage that they really give out to him.
Yeah.
To the point where it wouldn't be a battle of attrition anymore. They would actually be equally matched. Like I said, especially with having Rika as backup, there's no way that Yuta would fall short in a physical battle. And he can match them, like you said, in the curse tool arsenal. He also has an arsenal of curse tools that he can bring out at his disposal. He has an arsenal of curse techniques on top of that that he can use whatever he really needs. We've barely probably seen the amount of different techniques he has.
Yeah.
Yuta is just, he really is one of the only people that just has enough on his plate that he can contend with these people enough to actually put them down and keep them down.
For sure, 100%. Now, next up here, we're gonna pair these two together just because I think a lot of their abilities that they've shown at least are gonna be the same, and that is Geto and Kenjaku. They're paired together. I mean, I feel like for pretty obvious reasons, they both are kitted up with like her spirit manipulation. Their physical abilities should be pretty similar considering they're both in Geto's body. And this is another one where I'm like, wow, variety is really making this tough. Like, especially if you look at like Volume 0 Geto, right? He's hypothesized to have like 6,000 available curse spirits. He puts like 1,000 in Kyoto, 1,000 in Tokyo, and then goes up to fight Yuta and is like, this is enough. Man, he just has so much at his disposal, and he's so strong because, I mean, we see him doing essentially what we said would be hard to do, right, for Toji and Maki, and that is fighting Yuta and Rika simultaneously. He's just a beast, right? And I mean, Kenjaku himself just says, if Geto had all of his, like, basically all of his curses with him, he wins, right? Yuta doesn't win that fight. And that is just crazy, and right? Kenjaku has like similar scaling on top of some other abilities and this, new weird space manipulation ability that we haven't quite seen fully fleshed out yet.
This new fight really just shows like what Geto or Kenjaku are capable of, just like the level of like how we also learned that like he doesn't even need to use high level curses. Even he can just power the low grade level curse spirits he has with his cursed energy to make them even more. It's like before I would have said it's kind of hard, like the way that Toji kind of mollywops young Geto, but this is also a young Geto that would basically only use 2 curse spirits. And clearly, when he fights Yuta, there's a huge improvement in just the way that he uses his curse spirits when he fights hand to hand. And I feel like I said in this previous battle against Choso, we've seen the maximized display of what you can do with curse spirit manipulation in the physical realm.
Yeah, and I mean, even just his physical stats are nothing to laugh at. I mean, once again, with just Playful Cloud, right? He's like, hey, I'll counter Rika and Yuta, in Kenjaku's fight versus Choso, he's closing his eyes, dodging piercing blood, doing backflips and like flexing on Choso, right? Keep in mind Choso's somebody who like beat Yuji, and it's like, okay, Kenjaku is doing that and he's like making fun of him the entire time. Choso had to like evolve to not hit Kenjaku again. Like Choso's evolution resulted in Kenjaku, his hand being forced a little bit, but I mean, if you look at it, like, look at Kenjaku, right? No damage, none. That's crazy.
It's like 120% Megumi, like we were just talking about, like on like all the time on steroids, because he just has the ability to use multiple different curse spirits, and as we've seen, he released thousands of them all at once, all with like the command to massacre. So like he can just literally summon as many as he needs. It just like I said with Megumi's domain, he's able to clone Nue, clone all of his Shikigami. We already said that would present a problem for them. But this, now he has curse spirits that have the potential to, depending on what grade he wants to use, all have different techniques, designs, ability. He can literally just say, I want revenge, and then just spawn every curse spirit he has and like, all right, let's go. Now you're fighting me and 6,000 other opponents. Good luck. Yeah, and we've already seen, like you said before, he can keep up physically, and now that he's much more comfortable using those curse spirits in tune with his physical strategy. It's kind of tough. I don't know. I can see opportunities where they can get the win, but it's tough. I see more.
I would say this is also another another sorcerer that beats them out. Now, this one is a quick aside before we talk about the last and the most powerful character on the list. I wanted to just quickly address Yuki, just because I mean she has that special grade title. And this could act as sort of an interesting time capsule on how strong she ends up being. Man, I feel like her coming out against Kenjaku after seeing one ability and she's like, I got this, is kind of crazy. Like, that's kind of a feat in and of itself almost, to look 100%.
At 100%. I think like the one thing that like just proved Yuki's power, and it was always kind of called into contention, which I'm glad did get solidified, and I know we've talked about this previously, is what does it take to be considered or ranked a special grade sorcerer? And now Kenjaku was able to confirm that to be a special grade sorcerer, you have to be able to basically have the potential to take on an entire country all solo on your own, which, if that is the case, whatever Yuki's cooking, boy.
Yeah, I mean, like, just the fact that she sees everything that Kenjaku does versus Choso and is like, cool, I'll take him, is crazy. Her special grade status.
Even in Shibuya, she's like, she literally looks at Yuji and goes, let's go kick this guy's ass.
She's crazy, right? She's definitely, I mean, she's not a special grade for no reason. It's tough because, like, there can be characters who are really strong, but like sometimes their abilities don't match up properly with like Toji and Maki. But I will say, just based off of her ranking, based on how confident she is going against these characters, I would say it's safe to say that she's at least got a 50-50 shot, right? This is going to be an interesting thing to look back on right after it comes out, and we see how she scales relative to these other characters. But I would say I'd pretty confidently say like she's in that.
And she said that depending on the cult's outlook, if the Star Plasma cult had actually wanted to protect Riko Amanai, she would have been on their side. Which basically
and been like, okay, cool, fight me. It's like, huh? It's like, fight me. I don't care. You have the 6 eyes and the limitless. I'm bodying you.
We're all special grades, but I'm definitely different.
We are not the same. All right, we are not the same. For sure. So that's definitely, I think that's definitely an interesting thing. And then the final character, the final sorcerer on the list, is none other than the strongest, Gojo Satoru himself. And this one is a formality, right? Because of the video. I mean, but we saw the fight, right?
Yeah,
we saw what happened.
No contention. It's over.
It's like, okay, domain doesn't work. Who cares, right? Gojo's Gojo.
Especially at this point, long distance teleportation, the empowered red and blue that he probably has at this point. Like,
infinite stamina glitch. Like he really. It's almost like Todu's. He's like, never again. I will never be caught lacking like that again. And I mean, he's got to be wary of the inverted spear of heaven now, right? He's like, oh, that little thing. I'm never letting that get near me. That's not happening. Sorry. It's just Gojo. Gojo's just Gojo. Like, there's not much else to be said, right? There's just like, the real question is, what potential way could they do anything, right? The script is getting flipped at the end of the video. Right? It's more like, oh, how would Gojo counter them? It's like, no. How would Toji and Maki, what are they bringing to the table in this scenario? right? And the answer is kind of not much.
Let me pose this question to you. Do you think, I mean, obviously, Inverted Spear of Heaven is its own thing. Do you think the Soul Liberation Blade, like, can do anything against Limitless, or do you think it's just nothing?
I think Gojo would have to say, I'm going to take it down for you in order, like, and if it touches him, sure, right, it's a problem. But if they swing it at Limitless, it's like, oh, that's a problem. That's not doing anything. I think Inverted Spear of Heaven is the only way to get past it, and Gojo he's not letting that slide again. He's like, no, we're not doing this again. We're not.
Yeah, exactly. He just smacked that shit away, like with that, like the same way he does in Zero movie when he destroys that cursed spirit that's like getting in his fight with Miguel. He's like, get that shit out of here.
He's just gonna send he's like, all right, red, blue. Oh, purple. I remember purple killed you. Let's get rid of that. And
whatever he does to a coat rack guy is what he's just gonna disarm, like a disarm tactic. Boom.
For sure. Yeah, Maki's gonna but he's gonna look at Maki and get freaked out for a second. He's like, oh, just a ghost. And then he just, boom, purple. So, Toji and Maki versus every sorcerer. And, I mean, as you guys can tell, they're pretty strong. They beat most people. And want to reiterate, we talked about Toji and Maki versus every cursed spirit over on New Operator's channel, right? So if you want to see the sibling video to this, see how they stack up against the cursed spirit kind, go ahead and check that out. Make sure to subscribe to No Operator. He did an amazing job of helping me out here talk about these characters. Definitely a very fun video to do, a very fun set of videos, I should say, rather, and something that we're gonna start implementing on our channels more often, where we start making like versus battle videos like this, where we tackle similar topics. One video on my channel, one video on his. So if you guys did enjoy that, check him out.
Thank you very much for having me. It's always a pleasure. I enjoy talking with you about things. And eventually one of these days, I'll convince you that Miwa ain't shit.
Anyways, blasphemy.
But yeah, no, this was fun. And yeah, definitely check out the video that we did about the cursed spirits and Toji on my channel. It seems like, how many sorcerers were they not able to beat? About like 3 or 4?
Yeah, very, very few amount.
Very few amount. So we depending on how that other video goes that you guys watch, you may see that it may only the amount of people that can beat Toji and Maki may only get counted on one hand.
Yeah, it's a very small amount. So make sure to go check that out. Subscribe to both me and No Operator for more videos like this. Hope you guys enjoyed, and we'll see you in the next one.